Craft Farmer here with Cut the Check Podcast. We have an amazing special guest today. Bill, one of the tissue culture gurus. He offers classes, personal one-on-one coaching, and an amazing tissue culture kit. Bill, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Oh man, I am so glad to be here. This has been a long time coming.
Thank you. You have like a young heart about you.
What?
You know, you've been around, like you've been in, I mean,
I'm younger than you are.
What you've done in this industry, and there's just there's so many times that, you know, we're interacting with people that have come before us and really, you know, spread the landscape. And there's like this almost kind of a heaviness to the amount of work they've done and what they've put them through in this industry. And you have a glow about you.
Oh, thanks, man. No, I mean, I look at everything as waves. I don't know. I grew up in Florida on Daytona Beach, and you sort of see it. I mean, the waves come, and that's life. And you get old like that. And this is another one. So it's always like there is new generations coming in. You know, there's going to be a lot of people listening to this who are just a few years into this. They've got a couple years experience or exposure. They're just getting into the cultivation. I want them to be enthused because just like everything, the best is yet to come.
For sure.
It's a long way out.
Right.
Obviously, personal computing didn't stop with Jobs and Woz.
No. And it's, you know, I try to tell people all the time, like, this industry is at its infancy. Mm-hmm. So for you to think that everything is there and it's been going on for a long time, like, the joke's on you. Like, we're at the very, very infinite stage of this. And with that, the issues that we're seeing now, I think, are going to just become more and more drastic, whether it's pest pressure, funguses. Like, if we're seeing these things happen now, hop latent,
right?
And we're moving so quickly and we're mass producing so fast, we don't even know the kind of issues that are going to come up and that we're going to have to be fighting.
I'm the optimist on all those things. Once they're recognized, they're addressed.
Oh, nice.
And of course, we've got our tools to keep everything clean.
Sure.
I mean, the indoor environments are the finest tools in all of horticulture and really agriculture. This is absolutely unique. I mean, to have seen all of this in my time, I did greenhouse horticulture, field agriculture. I have an interest, aquaculture. I've got an interest in all these things. They're small scale, they're big scale. And the small people can take advantage of what the big companies have, and the big companies can take advantage of what the small growers have learned. And to make those all work together, we identify them, and indoors we have the opportunity to isolate those. We've got all those separate rooms, and that's really the way I look at this, as individual pockets. Every flower room is different than the one before it because we've taken propagation and made it its own pocket, and that is the core of the entire thing. And we can kind of get carried off into that because that's kind of been my big thing. That's why I have been touring and talking and visiting sites, is start clean. And even if something occurs in flowering on the along the way, it's manageable because it's going to be harvested, it's going to be re-cleaned, it's going to be reset. You know, that's for the flower people to deal with and the harvest people to deal with, and we can minimize. And that's the same story for pests, fungus, and the hop latent viroid or any of the other systemic diseases.
So rewinding this, you mentioned you're from Florida.
Yeah.
Born and raised in Florida?
Till about 98.
So what really spawned your interest in horticulture in the very beginning?
I was born into it. Mom was the gardener, and I was the weed puller. And so my house had just piles of those plastic pots. It looked like a nursery center. We had a heap of black soil that we would dig out from underneath piles of oak leaves. So unintentionally, my dad or whoever raked the lawn or blew the drive, piled all these leaves up into huge mounds. Well, guess what the bottom of those mounds looked like? Black, rich. It was beautiful, full of worms. And so I knew right away as I would turn those things over, we would use all those, incorporate them into all the little pots. So I had pots, seeds, everything everywhere. And it was funny. It was right about the time I was 15, probably the third time I ever took real cash out of my pocket to buy weed. $5 to buy a really shitty little brown bag. I said, fuck this noise. There's seeds in that bag. I'm going to plant them. And then I went on a spree that hasn't stopped since. I collected
Wow.
seeds everywhere. I went and found whoever sold me the bags. I found seeds in their ashtray. I cleaned the coffee table, in the coffee sofa cushions, in the carpet, and then eventually I just started cleaning their pounds, so I could get all these things because they'd have a variety of weeds coming in,
And
and
so
it was
that was
germinating
grown like
everywhere.
in Florida, like at
That
that
was
time,
that was
flowered.
would have been 1982, Daytona Beach, Ormond Beach,
Wow.
really.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really fun, and of course I was out there by myself.
How was like what was the response from like your parents at the time, like popping these seeds? Like, did they know, or did you kind of keep it to yourself?
You're only as sneaky as you think you are. It was just, I would put them in along with everything else, grow them as far as I could, hide the pots in the shrubbery. I even started making like little pot holders that would sit in the top of the shrubs about gutter length, so I could actually manage the plants from the roof. So I'd climb up on the roof,
Wow.
water them, but I couldn't have enough soil up there
Right.
to get through a summer. But it was real trial and error. The first seedlings got to a few inches, then they were a foot, then they were a foot and a half, and as they got bigger, I kept finding more and better places to put them. I did two things. High Times had an article, I think it was Ed Rosenthal's, about camouflage growing, so I got suddenly interested in marigolds and cosmos and zinnias as flowering cover crops, so I could put these things in the yard, and if I pruned them enough, I could hide the little weed plants, and they could actually go to flower without getting any taller than like 24 inches in the front yard.
Wow.
And plus, I was the weed guy, so the weed puller, so I knew what they looked like, and Mom just left them alone. But they would catch me occasionally crossing the yard with all these little pots and so on like that. And I got the talk, and I was like, I'm sorry. So that just meant I did it more discreetly and farther away, which drove me into the woods, right at the end of the house. I mean, truly, I was 3 houses from the end of the block, and in a golf course and tennis course community, and I could generally throw a frisbee and hit a train that went right by. So the Flagler train that goes north and south through Florida all the way to Miami, all the way to Key West. I crossed the tracks. Now we got a wooded area over there that I've played in all my life. Now I've got a new purpose. It's to go back out and start finding all my little spots, and the things you learn there. So Florida's made of sand.
Right.
Sand gets dry on top. It rains a little every day, but the top is dry. So I would go find a spot that nobody could reach, usually climbing underneath palmettos, past rattlesnakes, and whatever else, and would. I came up with a really fantastic way of making a deep, narrow hole, growing my clones to about 16 inches tall, but with foliage only in the top 4 inches.
Cleaning them up.
Well, I would just strip them because I would bury
Got
them.
it.
I would bury them that deep. I still have today, in my front yard, I saw them this morning, a pair of post hole diggers that I'd sawed the handles off of so it could fit in the backpack. And I would make a little narrow hole about 12 or 16 inches deep, put in some water crystals, some Osmocote tablets, whatever little leaf compost I could along the way, and the plant went that low, and then it got an 18-inch tall cage of chicken wire, whatever sticks I had, and I put the plants in there. I would carry a bunch of water jugs that I'd smashed flat, and would just poke them with a nail. I'd fill them up, puncture them with a nail, sit them right there. They would leach the water slowly in, and then once those things got enough roots, they would hit the water table. Because the other thing about Florida, top 12 inches of sand, 2 or 3 feet down, you're at the water table. And so once they hit that, they flew. And it was just awesome.
It's almost like a form of dry farming.
It was definitely dry farming because all that
Yeah.
stuff was like, my whole rule was, no maintenance. You
Right.
cannot go back and visit those things because your visits are going to get you caught. Someone's going to see where you go because you never know when someone's watching. I had to come and go at night sometimes, so I really had to be able to find my way around in the dark. And of course, people talk, and so you don't tell anybody.
And I think a lot of people don't understand like how severe it was back then. You know, like zero tolerance.
Florida, yeah,
And Florida to top it all off.
yeah, 10-year mandatory minimums. I wasn't there yet, but I would get there. And then, from that moment on, I was a wanted man.
Wow, that's awesome. So did that lead into you're going into high school? You're still obviously have this big green thumb. Do you decide at that time that like this can be a profession and you're going to go to college for horticulture? Or
Nope. I was a biology student, and I was pre-med, and it was just a thing I did on the side that made a little bit of money. And so my growing, obviously, now I'm starting to pull down pounds, multiple pounds, so on like that. There's two things. First of all, you got to get rid of it. And I'm a solo operator. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't tell my girlfriend. I didn't tell my family. Especially didn't tell my girlfriend. Super sweet, but didn't really want to know, A, I had money, and
Right.
B, give her anything that she could use against me when I pissed her
sure.
off, because I was going to piss her off.
Right.
And instead she got,
Too young not to.
yeah, instead she got a lot of nice dinners and presents and so on like that. But I always kept a job, so still had work, and that gave me an outlet. I had two outlets. I would sell to all of my friends' older brothers and sisters. So I'd be at your house, and I just have dropped off a couple bags to your older sister, who used to be my babysitter. And then you'd pop through the door, and it'd be like, hey, Clyde, what's going on, man? We were just waiting for you. And I'd look at her, and I'd like, we're all square here? Totally cool. Because I'd give her 2 bags for like $30.
Yeah.
And then she'd bump them up to 35, pinch them, and sell them to somebody else. And then I took a job at one of those big restaurants that has like banquet rooms.
Okay.
And there was the rest of my, there was the rest of my marketing my marketing audience.
Yeah, just kind of opened up the
They
doors.
took everything. Yeah. So I was like 15, 16. I'm hanging out with the waiters, going to their house. They're turning me on to their friends. And again, I didn't want to have any part of it. I was totally happy to lose $5 to just like be, sit on the couch and be a guest and have them take care of all that. It's like, they're your friends. You do it. I don't want to know them.
Right.
And just keeping my name out of it. So it was really kind of funny. But no, the school stuff was always biology. Just try to push it as far as I can, but having money and the pager and then eventually a cell phone, and being in a fraternity and having a really good social calendar, that I slipped on the pre-med stuff and just started taking the classes that I really liked. And at University of Florida in Gainesville, credit was about $99.
That's incredible.
I could grow and pay for it. Still kept a job part-time, so you always want cover.
Right, for sure.
Justify the income. And then at that point, I just started taking all of the courses that I liked, which through horticulture and botany and economics and chemistry, eventually took me to the tissue culture just sort of by accident. They have the research departments in horticulture upstairs, and going to visit my teachers, I'm walking by and I'm seeing all these plants in jars and tubes on the lighted shelves through the glass, and was like, what is that? And they were like, oh, that's plant tissue culture. You can do that. And I remembered that years earlier, I had gone to Epcot Center when it had just opened, and they had tissue culture there, and I didn't really know at all what it was. That's going to be the big pavilion with the hydroponic plants and the things suspended on chains and the sprayers and way out principles of everything that we would do. But one of my primary influences, even at that time, so that actually turns into its own story. But I was like, I'll take the class. And I took the class, the lab. It just happened to be with Mike Kane, who was the author of a lot of the papers and some of the chapters in the textbooks, and Indra Vasile, who was another one of the book authors from like 10 years, 12 years earlier.
Was this one of like the very early kind of infancy stages before they were using it in like tree cataloging and really like nursery operations that we see now?
In the first 20, 30 years, yeah. I mean, the commercial stuff had already really kind of gone, because the tree people were the big companies that primarily pulp around Tallahassee to have been using micropropagation for a lot of crops. They needed a lot of uniform tree crops with the same disease resistance and the same kind of characteristics at harvest, lignin,
Got it.
resin stuff. When you're cutting for pulp, you want to know exactly what you're working with so you can digest it. But those same companies had started making the plants for the ornamental industry, which was most of Central Florida. So right below the frost line, right where all the orange trees were, and south is where most of the nation's ornamental plants would come from, the tropicals, Syngonium, Spat, Dieffenbachia, Ficus, all that stuff you recognize from the floral department, malls, everything like that. Even your
all your Home Depot plants,
the one you're
else.
sitting right next to, and this guy too. This is actually from tissue culture, so it's kind of cool. It's this kind of stuff. I don't remember the name.
And that's because that they're finding a way to be resilient, to have all uniform size. they're running in a numbers game. So everything has to be as healthy, look the same size.
Most importantly,
uniform.
is small. So you want pretty little small plants. Sansevieria. So you're sitting next to a Sansevieria plant. You, of course, would propagate that by doing diagonal leaf cuts. You stick them in soil and a little plant grows off of it. And typically you leave that, you break off the big leaf and you keep growing it. Not really practical, whereas we can do that in a jar and get like 6 or 7 of those things going different directions every 4 weeks. The biggest ones go to the greenhouse to be potted, to be sold. So that way you got pretty little plants in little pots. That's what you want. You want pretty little plants.
Right.
We all want pretty little plants.
Right.
And I saw immediately where that was going to be part of, it could be part of cannabis. And that would come maybe a year later. I actually got hired from school.
Amazing for you to be thinking about this kind of stuff so ahead of things.
The truth is I didn't. It sort of just seeped in. It was kind of like on the back of my. Well, I saw the success. I saw the success of the greenhouses, and it was always like, how do I make A work for B? The university stuff work for the commercial house work for the hobby house, and so on. Just everybody share this because they've kind of got a different perspective, and they usually stay to themselves.
Right.
And I see it as a long curve of the same line.
Did you think at that point in that time of your life, like, were you thinking that cannabis would be legalized at some point? Like, were those, I mean, because you're a part of just such a negative environment around it, like, was your mind going that way? Like, it's hard to think of things like legal, like, even mushrooms when it's looked at so terribly wrong until you start seeing it being accepted. Were you kind of going in that, like, in your mind at that point when you were young?
Going to go that way? It was, if I had anything to do with it. It's really so funny. I wish we had hours. At the time that I was doing the growing, I discovered the seed catalogs. They had just started advertising the seed bank in 1984 in High Times. So I started ordering seeds. At the same time,
that was all the European market,
that would have
right?
been that was a Dutch source of pretty much California strains. It gave you a place where you could send your money, and then seeds showed up in the mail, and which was wonderful. And I'd never really seen that before. It was the first time it came out. And obviously, as it happens, High Times had to drop it because they pushed stuff to a limit, and then the DEA pushed back. And there was a couple of suits, but didn't stop me. I see the ad. I write for the catalog. The catalog comes with the man's own handwriting in it. It wasn't a printed catalog. It was a list.
Wow.
And it wasn't just copy. It wasn't Xeroxed. It was mimeographed. Remember the smelly paper?
Yep.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It was like that, and it's crossed out and handwritten by Neville, the guy who was running the place. He's taken the cash, and he's got his buddy Dwayne Deloitte in Canada and the U.S. doing the shipping. What's funny is now I'm friends with Dwayne, but I never knew him then. So I'm getting Dutch seeds. And the other part is of course, Normal is advertising for membership. And as soon as I made money selling weed, I was like, I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I'm going to put a few bucks in, and I'm going to throw it in there. But I did it anonymously because I didn't want to be on a list.
For sure.
And number two is that I carried that forward. And in college, I became associated with the Gainesville Legalization Organization, which was a yogi. And his hippie friends, and Normal at that level. So Florida had a Normal association, but Gainesville was the most active, and they took me to Tallahassee in their VW van when I was 19 because I was a clean cut fraternity boy, and I had a suit. So we went to Tallahassee, and they introduced me to the legislative process. Most of the lawmakers weren't there, but I talked to their aides and assistants and so on, door to door. Most of them were really polite. Some of them actually debated me back in the whole thing. But we got back in, and I realized right away, that's not going to change anything. This is not going to change anything. What it's going to take is attrition. I am going to make so much weed. I'm going to make so many growers. I'm going to put so much weed on the market. I'm going to put plants in their face every day, all day, forever, until the rules change. And so you remember that story about the seed collecting?
Yep.
That rolled forward. So I became I became the Johnny Appleseed of weed seeds. I planted those seeds in front of the police department all the time. As soon as they harvested them, I planted them again. They had mulch, they had little sprinklers. I know exactly where to put them so they'd get seedlings, and they knew for a fact there were going to be seedlings in that planter if the sun was out. Absolutely. And I did that all over the campus. I did that all over Gainesville.
Wow.
I carried film canisters, and for those listeners who don't recognize film canisters, photography used to be on film.
I mean, those are the ultimate stash. Like, I'll never forget. If we found Dad's film canisters, we hit the jackpot.
And if the coffee can's even better.
Yeah. But the film canisters, people have no idea.
That was it. I carried that everywhere. And so it was just sort of part of my thing. I never really screwed around in school. So I still did classes, carried those, planted as I went.
And these are Dutch seeds at the time? Or
No, this is just shit. This was Colombian, Jamaican.
Things.
That was it. It was all the stuff I scrubbed up. My good stuff, was for trade and giving away and so on like that. Because I spent a lot of the time I was going to school making growers as well. I realized real quick how close the cops knew about me really soon. I didn't get through my freshman year before I was already on the radar of University Police, Gainesville Police, and probably the DEA. From all my vocal stuff, my mailing and all like that. So I couldn't really grow in my own location. I could start little stuff, but I had to take it away. So it was that same model from Daytona and Tomoka State Park and Ocala National Forest. I had to carry forward. And
did you feel that? Could you feel that their presence at that time?
I did, unfortunately. So I kind of knew that my car was always clean. Never ever travel with that stuff. If you do, it's short trips. Keep it concealed. Remember, you don't give them access. You don't provide consent. Don't consent. And to really play it cool. But I, had a little network around me of people who would cover me like that, and I covered for them. I was definitely never going to be exposure for any of those guys. I had a lot of friends who had 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, and they would just didn't want roommates. They wanted it quiet, but they wanted to pay all the rent. So I introduced their new roommate, Bud Green, and got really good. This is sort of the beginning of where we would be today.
Yeah.
I find that we haven't really even done an introduction to what I do today. But I had all the grow equipment made from what we could, because we're still going back to late 80s or even early 90s.
Yeah, you're finding whatever tools that are available to make this work, or how can this grow indoors?
We had to build grow lights out of security lights.
Yeah, this is the infancy state of it.
Yeah, they would take down a telephone pole to change something, and when they got back, that telephone pole was missing its light. Absolutely. I would see that stuff, make a plan to be there that night, and I would take it off.
Wow.
Yeah. My roommate got into it one time too. Coming home from a bar, he got drunk and saw a telephone pole on the ground. They'd taken the arm and the light were still connected. So the thing's about 6 feet long. I can't remember what car he was. He throws it in the passenger side of his car, but the arm is still sticking out of the car by about 2 feet. And the house we were living in together just happened to have a great big tree on the right-hand side that you had to come pretty close to. And so in a normal mind, which he probably never had, Mark, I love you, he didn't clear the tree, and it caught the arm of the light, fulcrumed it right into the back of his head. I mean, it smashed his head like a baseball bat. And I just happened, by a freaking miracle, I happened to be standing in the yard to watch all this. I see the lights come up, I see them bounce, because it was we had a house in a hidden driveway. It was awesome. Bicycle distance from school. Amazing place. And we grew there, of course. But anyway, I see this, I hear smash, and the headlights just stopped dead. And I was like, fuck, he hit the tree. And so I run over, and he's already driving up my way. And he looks at me. He's got his hand on the back of his head. He pulls it out. It's covered in blood. He's like, I got to go to the hospital. So I throw him in my car, give him a towel so he doesn't bleed on the seat. And he gets over there and he says he's been hit with a bottle, et cetera. But then I get back to the house. I find the light on the side of my driveway, and genuinely, I mean, it's that steel or aluminum arm. It is the heaviest thing. It should have killed him, but he's like part Cro-Magnon, so walked away from that. But that's what we would do, and we would grow with that until we got tired with it. Then we'd stick it in the trees and use it as.
And those were like big halide lamps and stuff.
They were 250s and 400 sodiums or halides, depending on whether you're going to do the white or the red spectrum. But that was kind of it, is we didn't have so much access. There were some suppliers, by mail order, and there were some suppliers in the state, but the lights were still, you know, 250 bucks minimum.
Right.
And in fact, I got to see all this because they used to be, we used to have to, we would do our growing with like high bay lights. So you would buy a high bay fixture with a big bell
for
on
a shop, like you'd see hanging in.
It looks like the bell that the jet propulsion comes out of. And we would get that, and we would use tin snips and cut the reflector up about halfway and then peel it open like a daisy.
Oh, wow.
But here's the thing. Still didn't know that that it could be remote. So I've got a 42 or 50 pound ballast with this reflector on it, and the thing's hanging on heavy chain. And we got to put it up. And raising and lowering just strictly out of the question. And I remember the first time I looked at a High Times, and it had a remote light and ballast. And I was like, holy crap, you can do that? And immediately we took that stuff down and started taking it apart. And it just went from there. We ended up just re-engineering everything we could get our hands on. And then, of course, I ended up making some lights along the way, too, that would turn into the light company, Agrolux, and our featured little mini light.
So when to take it back a little bit, when you first got these seeds and you popped some of these seeds from the Dutch, was it kind of like, holy shit, these look a lot different than what, like, was it like, wow?
Yes,
like,
for sure. It was amazing. I mean, it was a Super Skunk, Northern Lights, White Widow, White Rhino.
Which are staples now.
I ordered everything in the catalog. And, you know, not all at once. I'd order in pieces. And once it didn't show up. And I was like, oh, shit, it didn't show up. I write a letter to Holland, said, you know, I'm really sorry, but this order didn't show up. They sent it anyway. You know, and that's kind of integrity they had.
Yeah.
But the plants were awesome because they also, of course, had access to the really good, serious Hindu Kush, fat leaf indica. I never was a breeder. Yeah, so I never really got the breeding thing. I kind of just went with what was available. You know, I know it's an art, and I appreciate the people who do it and just kind of follow what they do. But I was a clone master. So everything we did grow, we sexed it as early as possible. We cloned it, would put it through the varied crops, and would try to manage to hold the strain. And part of my strain management was my friends' grows. Because
to try to
spread
backlog your catalog and just to keep it alive, and the plant grows so fast. I mean, it's a huge problem for every grower, you know. And one mistake's made, and you lose your strain that you've had for 10 years, you know.
Backups to backups, because everything fucks up.
Yeah.
You know. But yeah, it would be like that, and so it was kind of funny. We would just spread it all around. Not that we didn't lose plenty, but it was awesome. They were the characteristics were amazing. They smelled awesome. They looked beautiful. I just had never seen anything like that. And that would have been really unique in the whole industry, because up until that moment, if you weren't in California or you weren't really fortunate to have, be touring with the dead, where did you find those? And I didn't know any of this stuff because I was in Florida. You know, like it was just like the skateboard thing for anybody who ever saw. Dogtown and Z-Boys, fabulous documentary. Is, you know, where did this stuff start when it was just a bunch of punk kids? And you made do with what you got, and you got really creative.
It's always been so interesting to me how connected Florida and California was. Like when you look at, you know, just the presence of cannabis and how much it meant to people. And here you have two states that could not be farther away,
or
yet
more
different, yet there's people that are like brothers and sisters that share this camaraderie and this value and really believe in this medicine.
Yeah, I wish I'd known them. I truly felt like an orphan. I genuinely was out there by myself, and I was always trying to find and meet the others. South Florida got better, and I ended up making some really good friends over in the Clearwater area, because Largo, Alan Bidnar ran the store over there. I would have to meet him through the industry.
Yeah.
Because all this happened like within the first week of me moving to California. I arrived with a moving truck on Saturday.
How did that whole thing take place? How did you decide to go from Florida all the way to California, and like at what point did that happen? Because you were in college, you start discovering tissue culture, seeing how it can help.
Yep.
How did that change happen for you?
It was that in Florida, it was about 91. I went into tissue culture as not as a profession, but actually I got hired out of school. So I was one of my teachers, my counselor, called me into the office and said, "Hey, we want to see you and we want to talk to you about something." And I thought it was because I was stealing soil and germinating seeds in the greenhouses. Well, they gave you all this stuff as
Right.
for work projects, but I would just seed everything in the greenhouses and then just take those trays home as soon as they started to pop. So I thought I was totally toast. Instead, they were like, "Oh no, we've got a big commercial tissue culture farm in Orlando, and they want someone for a special 1-year project. Would you want to do that?" And I said, "Can I come back?" Because I was suspicious, and they said, "Yeah, you absolutely can come back." And so I had this wonderful.
So it was
experience.
looked as like a break in school almost
Yeah.
for you. You're like, I'm going to leave school for a year, go do this hands-on experience,
Make
and
a
then
manager
potentially come
salary,
back.
and go back to school and pick up again. And that was amazing, and that's its own thing. But
What were they focused on?
they were
there?
ornamental, so that was where I got all that ornamental experience.
Got it.
They had spun off of
Ornamental flowers.
ornamental foliage.
Got it.
Primarily foliage. Foliage is going to be your syngonium, sphath, all those mall plants. When I was telling the story about the tree farms, having done the tissue culture, they would use their labs to do this work for these farms, but they were 2.5 hours away. And so what happened was the owner of my company, and it's funny, they're all in this, so I can name them. Randy Strode. Randy was fantastic, and his partner Jerry, who was the accountant. They left the timber company to go to start this new lab in Central Florida, and I got there about 8 years later. They had started in a bedroom, built it up to about 35,000 tissue culture clones a day, foliage
Wow.
plants, and we go to 100,000 today. So it got
Wow,
bigger
a
still.
day.
Yeah, but in 8 years they went from a bedroom to 10 acres of greenhouse, all babies.
Wow.
50, 72 plants per cell.
All TC.
All TC, absolutely, 100%, all the way down.
Wow.
And so it was a great opportunity. But I had ended up there, went back to school. How I got to California is my brother paved the way. So he's
Older brother, younger?
Younger brother, 3 years, yeah. So he actually finished school in a timely manner. I took more like, I think I took 8 years, counting the year off. But I did graduate with like 169 credits. So I just kept taking classes I liked until I had to leave. 170 was the absolute max. They said that you can't do 170. So I took classes up to my very last credit, and it took about 7 years. But he had gone out to California first, laid down roots in Hollywood. I got to go out and visit. A whole bunch of my friends were moving out to LA, but it was really my wife. She's in pharmacy and got a residency at Genentech and UCSF, and said, "Hey, do you want to move to California?" And in 6 weeks, I liquidated my little hydro store, closed up all my grows,
Wow.
sold the car, sold the house.
You were ready to go.
Total Beverly Hillbillies. Yep, cats, the whole thing, and drove cross country. I arrived on a Saturday. I had sort of made a plan for all this stuff because I had been a retailer in a small 500 square foot location. This room was my hydro store. But Bloomington Wholesale and Charles Winslow, the big sales guy over there, said, "Hey, they just started a Hydroponic Merchants Association. All the grow stores of the world are going to have their own meeting in San Jose." And I was like, cool. And truly, 6 days later, not only am I at the meeting, I've also traveled the entire Bay Area visiting all the stores that are already there. So I had just taken a field trip and had already laid down, made a business card, gotten an office space, and was planning on starting what I was doing, which was going to be online sales. I started online sales in 1996 in hydro. Just a list. So all I could do was publish my
Because the
list.
internet's fairly
It was
new
really
at that
easy.
point too. Like,
There-
right? Like 94, like we started really kind of
AOL.
getting into households. and-
AOL 1994, 93, yeah.
So, I mean, this is could you see that already? Could you see that it was going the direction like this online thing is going to be huge? Or
I could, but I was lucky because Gainesville was one of those places like Berkeley and Stanford, and MIT, where they were all in the internet really early. And in fact, I really, I should have followed computers. I mean, what was I thinking? But it was really kind of my brother's thing. So I was like, oh, he'll do it. I'll always have a piece. But no, that was great. I could move out. And at that little meeting, this first ever, we're at a little crappy Hyatt over near the casino in San Jose. It's no taller than 2 or 3 stories. And they're doing their setup. Here would be all the people who would be the whole hydroponic industry. Grodam was there. Hortilux was an idea. Maximum Yield Magazine was an idea.
Wow.
Hydrofarm, companies that are out of business like Diamond Lights, Green Air were there. Fox Farm it was there. And we're talking, there was maybe 64 booths in this entire room.
Wow.
So it was obviously very intimate. And what's kind of funny is I've got a little different approach to a lot of these things. So I show up on Friday, which is setup day. It's been 100% reliable. I always show up on setup day because it gives you another day of business.
For sure.
And most people can use a little hand so you can make a relationship at the same time.
That's like the greatest time to get your one-on-ones in.
And meet the boss.
Yeah, it's not at the end of the show.
Yeah.
There's no burnout. Everybody's not rushing to pack up.
Yeah.
Like that, it's before the general admission come in. Like that's where you can really make, if you need to go see someone or you have an agenda or contacts, I've always done the same thing.
I'll see you the day before at MJ Biz.
Exactly.
And Emerald Cup.
Exactly.
Yeah. Plus, they're usually not checking badges or anything like that.
You
so
can
if you
go
help
check
someone,
whatever you want.
Yeah, you see someone with 2 boxes, you carry one, you're in.
Exactly.
And if you're really, really lucky, they got an extra booth pass.
Exactly.
But no, it was just great like that. But here's everybody in that one space. I did, if anyone remembers the beginning of Schindler's List, a little different part, where he's getting ready to schmooze his generals so he can get all that stuff. What's funny, I went into the hotel, started ordering drinks at every bar I could find, making friends with the serving people, tipping them an extra buck so they remember me, and said, okay, we're going to be taking breaks over the weekend. If you see me, you interrupt me no matter what. If I've got a full foamy beer spilling over, you stop and ask me if I need anything else, and then offer by whoever I'm talking to. And they're like, okay, sure, whatever you got. Well, during the weekend, that would be the owner of Hydro Farm. That would be the owner of Sunlight Supply and things like that. And, we're talking, but then the person's like, Mr. Graham, would you like anything?
Right.
And would your friend like anything? And I'd be like, Peter, and they'd decline or accept because it didn't matter.
For sure.
So cheap. But they'd walk away and these people are like, who the hell is this guy?
Right.
But it was fantastic because the industry was so tight. Obviously,
Marketing techniques at a very, very early stage.
It just sort of occurred to me because I was like, what do you do special? That's always the game, is what do you do special to try to, I'm going to break rules, but I'm not going to hurt feelings. I'm not going to cut someone off in line.
Right.
It's going to kind of be like, I'm going to wear something taller and brighter than anybody else in the line if I can help it.
Right.
We'll see where it's paid, but that it's all about consistency. Mostly just still being me. I still had something to offer. I just wanted to I wanted to get a few more seconds in that conversation.
Wow.
But it was really fun, and of course it blew up big. It's amazing. Most of those companies got bought by Hawthorne.
Was that at the time, like those are considered your mom pop garden kind of supply at that point?
They were mom and pop stores. So the best
it.
part was we still didn't really have chains going in the retail.
And hydroponics is just such a fresh, I don't know, category at the time. Like, so it was still like garden supplies or stuff like that.
Yes, very much. I mean, obviously with the specialty and trying to serve cannabis growers, but diversifying. You wanted to serve anybody in the market who was interested, because just like now, there were a lot of hydro heads who wanted access to anything. If they were going to build their own gardens with buckets and tubing, you at least can sell them the fertilizer and the pH meters, whatever. The substrate. There's always a few dollars to be made, even from a home builder. But it was really kind of interesting. The Hydroponic Merchants was created from the Hydroponic Society, which was the professional organization who did presentations on hydroponic technology, drew together the research papers. So anyone who was doing any kind of research associated with fertilizers, artificial lighting, anything high tech that was just outside ordinary horticulture, or whatever part of commercial horticulture that was applicable to home users who would buy or share these crops, because we had hobbyists all the way up. They participated in the Hydroponic Society, and it would have been about 20 years old at that time. And before the HMA was where all the hydroponic people would meet. Really, genuinely good people. I mean, these are your college professors and people who had nothing to do with cannabis. DEA had all of them on a list. So if you were in HSA, by all means. Remember, at that time, anything indoor grow, we were basically Black Panthers. So the FBI would look at you, the DEA would look at you, just in the ordinary course of collecting information. They used those lists in 1989 88 and 89 when they did massive raids that took out lots of head shops. They passed a law in 87 that said, okay, anything that can be associated with illegal activity, that's going to be cultivation, meaning equipment, or consumption trade, scales, bongs, baggies, so on like
Pipes.
that. It might be the exact same thing you'd use for something else, but if they could make the connection, then everything that business sold, because it was to target businesses. It Controlled Substances Act 1987 was sort of a remake of an earlier Nixon law, but they just wrapped it all up with a nice bow and said, okay, the weak link here is the head shops and the grow stores, because they're in the phone book. They pay taxes. We know who they are. We know where they are, and they're not moving, and they're going to be there tomorrow. And the first year they went after the head shops, took out about 1,000 head shops around the country, and the year after that they took out the stores.
Wow.
So that left the stores very timid, and it obviously left the distributors very timid as well. Everybody had sort of been pushing it because, yes, High Times is free speech and so on, but if you sold grow equipment in High Times and it showed the equipment being used to grow weed, you were a target. And I mean, Hydrofarm was the big one. They ran 2-page ads. They totally got away on the skin of their teeth. Good lawyers.
I mean, they were big too, right here out of Petaluma, one of the biggest distributors, if not the biggest at the time.
And look at that partnership: Hydrofarm in Petaluma and General Hydroponics, which was Corte Madera, and then eventually would end up in Santa Rosa. But totally,
pretty wild.
Those guys are really pretty tight. Yeah,
I mean,
but everybody was a rebel
for sure.
Yeah.
And just, it's so interesting too, looking at the West Coast and seeing all these parallels, the tech, the cultivation, nutrients. Like the West Coast has really kind of pushed the bar in the last, 40 years.
The whole time. When I was in Florida, my whole thing was reading about the West Coast.
Really?
High Times magazine, of course, you'd have all this great stuff on NorCal, and then Sensibilia Tips, which would have come out probably 81, 82.
That was another publication?
It was. That's Tom Alexander. He was a grower and owned the shop New Moon in Corvallis, maybe Eugene also. But he would have been
scary.
He was a peer of George Cervantes. So George Van Patten, George Cervantes, and Tom were both running stores in Oregon at the time. And of course, when we talk about this big bust, there he was. So he has all this stuff come through. They take the store, because it's easy to arrest property. That's why they made the law the way it is. You walk free. Shit, you're free to open the store tomorrow if you want.
Right.
With what inventory and with what money and after paying what bills. So, it's an atom bomb for a store. But he said, well, the thing I got is info. There's a big country, and he started publishing the magazine Sensibilia Tips and putting that out. So I would get these things just like the skateboard and surf magazines that were also from California. So it's great. I'm over on the East Coast. I'm just the magazine reading kid, picking this up off the newsstand and just enamored. I was like, oh, wow, it's fantastic. Like your wrestling and UFC things like that. When you're first picking them up as a kid, where else were you going to get that?
Right.
You look at the cover and
No,
it's got blood and gore. It's got blood and gore. I've got to read it. And where's the stuff happening? And you're just all into that. It's like where it is and what it is.
It's like in our DNA.
It is.
There's that rebelness.
It's almost like running a podcast about growing in the industry that may be listened to by people who are in other parts of the country that are not where we are right now.
Or the world, for that matter. I mean, think about our influence that we've had on the world and cultivation. I mean, incredible, absolutely incredible. And then how easy it is, going back, just thinking back to like 2002, I would drive all the way to Novato to get anything I needed and make sure
all the way to Novato.
Exactly, right? To like grab a fucking jug of something and make sure that you park down the street and they have people have no idea how easy they have it now with the internet and Instagram and
easy. You're still talking to people who have to drive to the next state.
You drive across the United States even,
Yeah, or the adjoining country. Novato, by the way, is 20 minutes away.
Yeah.
But that's really funny. Totally. I look at you guys as being spoiled.
For sure.
obviously much closer. I got to see the nutrient vending machine, so that never really
And
came
you'd
to
be
be.
so scared to go to that. Like,
You would be scared to go.
you're paying someone to go try to get you a jug and then drop it somewhere so you can run and get it. And wild.
Your best stores had a back alley.
Yeah.
You know, right?
And you always parked and you always come in the back.
Yeah. You park
so
park
funny you
park,
said that.
park around the corner, walk in, do your shopping, leave your stuff at
Might
the back.
even do a pass.
Totally, you do
See
a
how
pass.
many customers are in there.
Uh-huh.
What's happening.
I own 2 of those. I own 3 of those stores, so I had to deal with all of this.
Wow.
And I had the cops parked out in front of my place. There's a story about everything.
For
but
sure.
I mean, I had places where I would walk up to the window and just ask these guys. It's like, can I bring you anything? They've been there 3 days, 2 SUVs, black windows, looking right at my door. And they're funny enough. They open the window.
That's what I was just going to ask. Like, they actually acknowledge you when you approach them?
They acknowledge me, and they're just pretty much like, no, thank you. We've got what we need. We're sticking around, taking care of our business. I was like, all right, let me know if you need anything. And I'd
Right.
walk back to the store. Customers would come in and tell me, they're like, those SUVs were there yesterday. And because they did a pass. And I would, it was just like something we dealt with. And so it was always like, don't load big
Right.
stuff where everybody can see it. So, we'd use, discreet packaging. I was a pioneer in recycling boxes and trash and all like that. So I would, whatever they walked out of the store with carrying their product looked like it was trash.
And where was this store located?
When I first got to California from that show, I ended up interviewing with all the big companies, but they were farther away than I could go. And I took, I started managing Hans Lighting in San Jose, just off 280 at 6th and Virginia. And we were in a little business plaza. I think there were 4 businesses in a row, and we had the end. But it was great. You could see it from the highway, and truly, when you came down the exit, you'd better slow down because you were going to go right through my little brick wall into my parking lot. So you had to do a little jog. But you could see coming down the exit just everything that was going on in the store, and there was only one way in and out. We didn't even have a real door.
Was that considered horticulture lighting then, or was it something else?
It was both. It was awesome. So you want to talk about providing cover? We were a we were a lighting supplier and service company. My partners were Ken and Karen McDougall, and they had bought an existing business, really just looking to get into the service. They had come from tech, AMD, and chip making, and wanted to do something of their own. So they're like, he had been a Navy electrician, and so they bought this business, and it was a granny unit in the back of a house, and it came with a van, a couple customers, and it was mostly like changing out fluorescent bulbs and ballast and wiring whatever was necessary, pretty much strictly lighting. But she reaches under the table and she pulls out a diamond light and a hydrofarm light, sodium and a halide. And she said, every so often someone's going to come by and ask for this. And they were like, oh, cool, whatever. And they had no experience in it. And then it was maybe like 3 or 4 years later was when I showed up, and they were doing about $27,000 a month.
What year is this?
This would be
Bill?
1998.
Okay.
1998. And it was just a drive-in warehouse. Roll up the door, the truck pulls in, and all the shelves were covered in dirty ballast and capacitors and all those magnetic components.
Yeah, because this is pre-digital at this point, right?
Oh, quite.
Yeah.
And it was pre-everything. But I saw what they had, and I saw the business they were already doing. And we had just had this meeting, not 6 miles away.
Right.
So I was like, the whole world. I mean, we had Australia, New Zealand, Canada, UK, and Holland,
wow,
all meeting in this one little spot. And I was like, look, we are ground central for this. Let's capitalize on it. And plus, the Bay Area was really obviously a hotspot. Prop 215 had just passed in 1997, so you had legal cultivation for patients and caregivers. You just didn't have legal sales. So the store was still under federal law, but the growers could get away with this stuff if they were in the right boundary and if they had the right lawyers. So we had Tony Serra defending people. We had Todd Mike Uriah. Dr. Todd was writing scripts. Dr. Todd wrote my script. So I had one of the first medical scripts in 1998, going back that far. But it was still small stuff. $27,000 in a month is not big, but I saw the potential. So we just refit the whole place. I moved all the building and service crap to the back, and put everything in the front that was related to grow. So when you walked in, you saw a store. Soil right there at the door, you saw your lights, and most important, they had done this before I got there, was they had a beautiful little closed grow room with glass windows so you could see it, a couple of doors so you could walk people through, and they had a couple of the lights and stuff on for display. We would sell all these grow lights, but along the way, the lighting suppliers who provided us the lights that we would put in a Burger King sign, or that you would put into the parking lot lights, or that we would install in the server warehouses and high rises where Silicon Valley was starting, were all warehoused where I would build everything into a grow light. If I could find anything that had potential as a grow light, we made it into a grow light. And it was kind of funny how it went. And then we started getting into clever electrical at the same time. High voltage flippers, using switches. We use a low voltage to switch a high voltage. That's called a relay. We would build all these things from scratch. And I was learning from the electrical guys because I had all the tools. If it was slow, I went through all their stuff. But these guys would come in, they would give me stuff that never even existed. So we were building and using the first digital ballast in the 90s. I had 250s and 400s. We were using low pressure sodium. We were building CMHs. I still have the first CMH grow lights that I built in 1998 at my warehouse, little 100-watters.
Wow.
I was the master of those little egg-shaped 100-watt, 150-watt bulbs. You know, you could stick them in your pocket. They were tiny.
Right.
But it's all about the arc tube. The rest of it's all bullshit. And so, you know, I wanted to use more lights over a broader area than big bulbs because you could diffuse the output,
Right.
which leaves us to where we are with LEDs. And we were making LED grow lights in the 90s as well.
No way.
But over a period of about a year, I turned 27 grand a month into about 154. So
Wow.
average 152. We averaged that. And so obviously I had a place and I was like, look, we need to multiply this. We need to build it up. So I was looking for other store locations. And it just so happened that our neighbor store in Mountain View had started as a small distributor, sort of struggled on the inside because one of the owners had left. And they were just way too anxious to get out of the business. So they were like, you guys are great. Larry Raynack, who was making a deep water aero system at the time, said, hey, you should talk to these guys. We bought their store, their distribution, and got into the game basically right alongside Hydro Farm, and then eventually what would be Sunlight.
Wow, that
on
is
little
cool.
stuff, because I was building a grower's catalog.
Right.
You open the catalog and it was the stuff that you needed because we grew and we spent all day making things. If it didn't exist, we made it. And the next time you showed up, you know, we would give it to you. You were my prototype tester. Sure, it might screw up. We got another one. We'll back you up. It's not going to hurt your garden. We're open every day. So there's almost no risk. And we build this stuff up and make it out of nowhere. At the same time, I got into traveling to Canada in particular, and then to Australia and England to sort of see what they were doing. Because all those people I met at that show
Right.
and their product companies were doing stuff different. And I'd go up there to see how the stores were different, what they carried that we didn't have. And most importantly was going to British Columbia and seeing how you could do 100 and 200 light grows, because that didn't exist down here. You know, if it did, it was a
Right.
mess. If you want a 100 light grow, any other store in the country would give you 2,000 watt lights, a 4x8 tray, a 70-gallon reservoir, and say, okay, cool, do this 50 times.
Right.
And your lights, there was no such thing as high volume airflow and stuff like that. You could get some little afterthought 4-inch air fittings on your light. Did you dealt with air cooling, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
for years,
Yeah.
that was the only way that we knew of, because, you know, we had smaller spaces. You got to remove the heat. You can't fill it full of AC. We didn't have AC techs.
Didn't have AC.
You know, like, these are all scary people to have over to your house.
I thought you were closer to me than you made put. Yeah, when he made that old comment earlier, I'm just like,
Camera didn't see that.
Who are you talking about? It must be somebody else in this room. But it was stuff like that. Yeah. And that was really wild. ACs. You had to. We would buy. That was one of the things I brought down from Canada. Is we could sell 5 and 10 and 15 ton and 20 ton AC units that were furnace air conditioners with pre-charged tubes on a pallet, and you would roll those in. We didn't have split units yet. And so this was the best we could do for
It's
a home
like
installation.
all in one, right? With the
Two
with the
big
return
pieces.
and the okay.
Two big pieces. So you had the part with the cold and fans, and the thermostat that would go inside. And then you had that big thing that sits outside the house with the heat that would go outside. And then we had the pre-charged tubes you'd have to run between them. And it was like a split unit, but it was a 20 horsepower split unit.
Big.
Yeah.
Big units.
Is that horsepower? What's the big unit?
Tonnage.
Tons. Yeah, it's 20 ton. 20 ton units. So we'd do those. That was the best we could get to a split unit, was these giant things. And giant fans. In the States, you could get 6, 8, 10.
Right.
Up to, they pretty much quit at like 8 and 10 inches. And that was Hydrofarm. So what I did is I go up to Canada and start picking up their brands, and now I'm getting into 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, and 24-inch fans, monsters, and the ducting and everything else that goes with it, which was absolutely unique, which actually leads to me being part of one of the biggest, a significant DEA raid that I got to walk away from.
Really? You care to go into that?
Sure. It's 7 years. I'm safe. Besides, I was cooperative, not to the best I could, but legal limit. But what happened was in the Bay Area, there was a whole bunch of organized
crackdown,
growing.
right?
Well, there was a whole bunch of organized cultivation. I sort of tell the story of setting up my buddy's houses.
Yeah.
And what we'd do is we'd split the harvest, and then eventually they'd buy me out. And so they would trade me weed or money for the equipment.
Which back then, and even going into the 2000s, it was a very big model by a lot of hydro stores where, if you've been going in there for a while and there was some kind of relationship, they would give you the equipment. You'd give, the owner half of your crop, pay for your equipment,
I was never that bold as a store.
Yeah.
But I was that bold as a contractor. But I know what you're talking about. I did start fronting some credit, and I did support their associates. So it's like, okay, they're with me as long as I can come back to you on the money. They could take what they wanted, and I just kept a list with everything. Fast forward to early 2000s, we've got organized stuff, and so you would have a grower set up his cousins, friends, basically whoever they could fly over from Vietnam or China, and stuff like that. And no race stuff. This was the deal.
Sure.
And they were the bosses. So they would set these guys up as long as they could sign a mortgage and utility bills and manage it all, they would do it. And so all these little groups would do this, and then they multiplied.
Wow.
And you could sort of see how this kept going. Yeah. And eventually it worked up to, there was a 200 amp model. So we had a 200 amp model with a shopping list and everything that would go into it. And they would buy these things. And eventually they got caught only because, obviously they got sloppy, funny enough. It wasn't loose lips. It was, two guys in a minivan with no seats would pull into a driveway, garage door would go up, they'd pull inside and go down. These are neighborhoods where people are playing and walking their dogs and doing things like that.
Suspicious.
Yeah, it's like, who the hell lives next door to me?
Right.
Kind of thing. And then talking to the neighbor on the other side saying, I have no idea, but they don't even have curtains. They've got, the windows are paper shut and stuff. But anyway, what happens is, I come into work one day in, I think June or July of 2007, and I've got two customers there. Unfortunately, they're like two oldest customers I could possibly have, like the 80-something-year-old who life insurance salesman and the 76-year-old organic fertilizer sales guy. And they're talking with each other because they're friends. And I had like 3 vehicles come in, and all these guys come in flak jackets and the badge on the chain, and guns and holsters, but they're not really crazy. They just kind of move around, make sure there's no weird stuff going on, and then make their way to the office. And meanwhile, I'm on a telephone call.
Did they announce themselves as like search warrant, or they just came in?
They just kind of walked in like that. Yeah, they kind of walked in all the doors, because it's retail, so there's no restriction to any of that. But I was on a phone call, and I it took me several minutes to get off the phone call, but I was polite about it. But in so much time, I've offered them a seat. I push the candy dish over there, and we start to talk. But ultimately, what happens is they hand me a very thick subpoena, mostly because they followed up on like 75 or 80 of these houses.
Wow.
They got us stacks and stacks and stacks of photos, and I really didn't recognize most of them. I probably recognized a few, but what had happened was they had this was an operation called Disco Days, and out of Discovery Bay and Lower
Yeah.
Stockton, Lower Sacramento, and that area where the prison is over there. And so they were just after me because all of these grows were using my fans and my giant fat filters, which is now Fresh Filter. So using my giant carbon filters
So your
and my
name's
giant
on
fans.
it, basically?
Oh, my name is on it. Oh yeah, it's 7 pages of pure food gardening, William Graham, and all of this stuff. Because what had happened was, in the process of doing good police work, somebody, and I admire him for this, got the serial numbers off of the fans.
No way.
Contacted Fantech, and Fantech said, "Oh yeah, all those fans were sold through this one store right here," and they pointed their finger at me. Not that I hadn't actually saved their
Yeah.
giant fan industry 1 year earlier when they moved it and fucked up the fans. I was the one who discovered the fault and the solution. I brought salespeople from 2 coasts to my place to see how to fix it, and they ended up putting that into manufacturing. But anyway, now they've sent the DEA to me without any warning, thank you. But it's all cool. You know, there's not really much we can do at my place.
Right.
Because the first thing is, Secret Service guy sits down. He wants to copy my hard drive. And I was like, that's fine, but you're just going to get music and pictures. He goes, what do you mean? I said, these are all workstations. And he goes, huh? And I was like, the server is in San Jose. Funny enough, the server was at my other address in San Jose. But I read the subpoena, and it wasn't on there. So I knew they couldn't go there. Dead end. So he gets all butthurt and goes and sits in the car. And then it's like, all right, well, what we will do is I'm going to show you my business program. And we are going to look up each and every day. First thing I do is you call the prosecuting attorney. So you call somebody else to get verification of everything. And I contacted her.
To make sure the paperwork's legit.
Just to ask any little questions. There's loose ends that they don't know the specifics of, but I do. And I'm like, I just want to make sure that we do this just exactly right, which they do too. She doesn't answer the phone. So the next call is the judge. Judge answers the phone. Ask him the same questions. He verifies it. Everything's solid. I was like, thank you very much, Your Honor. We're going to go forward. I'll look after everybody. And so at that point, I'm in control. So yeah, we go through. And ultimately, what happens is we go record by record, searching by
like
the fans.
sales order by sales order?
Sales order by sales order. Mostly by product. So I show them the product. It points to the invoice. And you can see the sale. 2 fans, 2 filters, $3,600 cash sale. You know what the next one looks like? Yeah. And it goes on like that. If it was anything different, it was 2 fans, 2 filters sold to Berkeley Indoor, you know, or to one of the stores in Santa Rosa or Petaluma or something like that. Ultimately, after about 13 or 14 of these things, I look at them. I was like, look, my guess is the people you're looking for paid cash for all these things. I said, I would have gotten any more information. I said, but I'm not at the desk really, and it's a cash sale. And yeah, it's unusual, but it's only 4 items. So, you know, cash goes to the bank, everything's recorded, it's all solid. Dead end, like that. And, it was kind of funny. Ultimately, I had such clean records that I had a 24-foot glass counter. They had 11 agents. It was like 2 real DE agents, and the rest were Stockton Police and Task Force and so on. I just lined them all up on the table and gave each one of them a whole month's worth of sales. Every day, every week, and every month had a cover letter with all the totals on it, and the invoice numbers were in order. Perfect. And there's no corroborating evidence, no names, no accounts, no any BS or anything like that. If we ever did anything like that, we always put it on a Post-it note. Put it on a Post-it note, put it on the invoice, throw it away when you're done. Even if it was stuck to it, it's not legally admissible.
There's no law of having to record people's information or their addresses or their names. It's a cash sale. What about warranty?
Yeah.
No, they didn't want to give their information.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lose the sale.
And we could have done some homework on the credit card, certainly, find that amount. Everything was always processed in a lot at the end of the day anyway. But it would have taken a subpoena to get it from the credit card company, which I also knew. And so what's up is at the end of the day, I was just like, we don't have anything. Funny enough, your readers would really appreciate this. One last story is that at the end of the day, I had, the real loudmouth cop at the very end over there at the table. He pulls out one order, and he's looking at this thing, and it's like $12,000 or $13,000 order for hydroponic supplies. And he was like, look at this. Who spends $13,000 on a hydroponic garden who's not growing weed? And remember, there's one guy who's in charge of this whole thing, and I'm with him. We stick together like glue. And I looked over at him and I said, actually, that was the gentleman you saw this morning when you came in, the 84-year-old. I pointed a picture of, I got up on the wall that has this beautiful greenhouse with the hydro gardens and tall sunflowers and beans and stuff all over it. And then I asked the leader, I said, is he supposed to do that? And he goes, no, he's not. The leader walks down to the end, talks to this guy. That guy said nothing for the rest of the time he was there. He didn't even say goodbye when he left. Just totally shut his shit down. Because I was like, don't be an ass.
Right.
It's right up there.
I mean, at the time, like sunrooms are really popular. Like there's as much as they want to say, oh, this is only for cultivation. It's like green thumbs and plant work and life and oxygen. Like it's really, it goes hand in hand. It's like.
That's it. That wasn't his garden,
right? For sure.
But it truly, it would have looked something like that. Is how it went. But that's what we did. Is we put that stuff on the wall. I showed off all kinds of houseplants all the time. I am still the hugest fan of using any of this technology to grow whatever anybody wants to grow at their house. I think everybody should grow every inch you got. If you got a patio and you're in an apartment, that's where hydro was. I did it for years. My apartment, with my now wife, then girlfriend, who I moved to California with, looked like a curtain of cucumbers and tomatoes because I built and sold these hydro gardens.
Like verticals kind of style?
It was vertical until the stuff got so big it started hanging down to my neighbor's place. So I'd actually go downstairs and harvest tomatoes on the patio from my neighbor's place. I lived in a great big complex called Brandywine, and doesn't sound right. I lived in a great big complex, and I would tell people to come in, and I wouldn't even give them my apartment number. They were like, how do I find you? I was like, you'll know where I am. Yeah. And truly, all you do is you look around, you can see this curtain of green coming down from the third floor, almost covering the second floor.
Wow.
And it was like, yeah, that's Phil's apartment.
And
it was hilarious. And it wasn't anything. It was 2 rain gutters, a styrofoam cooler, a little fountain pump, and that stuff. And I sat in the living room making those most afternoons. So I put all that stuff together and wrap it up and sell it to everybody else. It was building those kinds of gardens at like a little Harmony Fest music festival when I met Paul Stamets, who's now the big mushroom king.
Man, yeah,
you
for
know
sure.
him. He's at the little table across from me on a walkway in grass.
Wow.
And I'm over here drilling the trays, and he comes over to see what I'm doing because he's got his big funky mushroom things that he was already doing, and I'd already owned his psilocybe fanaticus kit. So what's funny is that's how we made our friendship way back then. I don't see him much these days, but it's hilarious. There he is at a table at this Gainesville Music Fest, and I'm over on the other side because I was like, I'm going to do work. I brought my drill, I brought my miter box, and I'm sitting there making gardens that I would be advertising and selling right there at the show, and he's right across from me.
That is too cool.
Oh yeah, it's just funny shit. I mean, life is really weird. Life is really weird.
At what point did you really start thinking like, I want to make a tissue culture kit? Like when did that idea kind of come into your mind, and how did that happen?
That's funny. I did the tissue culture initially in 1991 when I was in Orlando, when I was in Apopka, because I had all the supplies and I did it. But at that point, of course, it really kind of went to sleep because it was when it's going to be a practical application. But I really got to give a lot of this credit to, frankly, 2 things. At that time, I was making and selling the vertical gardens.
Okay.
Vertical garden. Then we were working with mostly
all in one kit, basically.
It was all in one kit. We were mostly working around bare light bulbs. The premise was we could take some smaller wattage bulbs, 250s, 400s, 6s, and usually air cooled, but they might be naked, and hang them with no reflectors, base up, because bulbs used to have a base with a thread, and we'd build the garden around it.
Very popular for a long period of time is hanging these HPS bulbs.
That what you could do the vertical where the bulbs hung, or would do the horizontals where the garden rotated around it. So it looked like a big barrel with all the plants going to the inside. Obviously, the bad part of they sold a bunch of them. I sold more than probably anybody on the planet because I had Coliseum, I had Ecosystem, I had RoboGrow. All the brands would go through my distribution because the other distributors wouldn't touch it. But their need was so many uniform little plants because you had to really be flowering stuff at like 5 or 6 inches.
Yeah, it can't just take off at all different sizes.
Yeah, and to make the clones for all that, your mother room took away all your savings. Is how it went. So I did it first as sort of a solution to that, but I give most of the credit to Eric Pearson at Spark. Eric, in 2005, looked me up because he was just starting to set up his big grows around South San Francisco and already knew what he was going to need to
And
fill
knew
them.
you because of just the industry and the shop and
Yep, I was, 20,
yep.
25 miles away in Mountain View. And so he came down to see me. And what I did was in my bathroom downstairs, which is funny, same house, still have tissue culture in it. With my guests, when I don't have company, I've got a bathtub with a little wired shelf and a tiny little personal air filter, but that's my tissue culture lab with the capability of doing, hundreds and hundreds, over 1,000 plants. And it's also got a built-in chair.
That's cool.
I've never really done both at the same time, but the possibility exists. So I started doing that. I made the kits because I needed to give Eric this technology, but I had to do it in such a way that it couldn't come back on me.
Got
As,
it.
I made a specific tissue culture kit for this cultivation. I would make grow stuff for people all the time, and I was always afraid of my fingerprints, which were everywhere.
Right.
And that never happened. But the tissue culture, everybody knew I was a tissue culture guy. So what I did to get around that was I wrote down everything and just started boxing it up as like a plain box kit. That way I had plausible deniability. I sold them a blind box. I didn't know what they were going to do with it. And the box doesn't say anything about cannabis.
Right.
Not then. And so that was really how that happened. That was 2005. I used what I knew. I just went back and copied what I had done in 1991. And it would be really until 2009 before even the tissue culture industry started doing cannabis. First multiplication cannabis tissue culture paper is Dr. Hemet Leda from University of Mississippi, Ole Miss. Their Department of Pharmacy, DEA sponsored labs, but she tissue cultured using TDZ as a multiplication medium, and that's kind of considered one of those explosive first papers.
Wow.
And then she followed that up in 2014 with another paper on using a different hormone.
Did you find that? Did you have to do a lot of experimenting with hormones to find something that worked particular with cannabis, or did you find something that worked with other ornamentals were working? Like how did that process happen?
I would like to say it was difficult, but it wasn't. We had it from the work that we did in ornamentals. We had like 3 basic media that we would try to put everything on, because at the farm over there we had over 2,000 varieties of almost 400 species. And so as a practical nature, we could not make specialized nutrient for anything. So it was kind of like, okay, let's take what we got and try it on all of them, see which one works best. And that was really how it was, is I just duplicated the same stuff that I would have made in that lab, because I saved all my paperwork.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't know it by memory anyway. And that was really kind of it. In fact, it's funny, my best performing multiplication hormone then is still my best performing now. And for those who have kind of seen some of the tissue culture stuff or followed my kits, is the benzoylaminopurin, which is synthetic cytokinin branching hormone, and it's a tank. You can heat sterilize it, you can store it, and it still performs just like the rooting hormones. You know how badly you can beat that stuff up. Pull out your old jar of Clonex, it's
Right.
dried into a flake, and you can still rehydrate it and dip plants in it, and it's going to root. So it's the same kind of thing. And so I did that against probably my top 3, and then over time I tried a few more as I got other ones that did okay were more delicate. So they were like natural hormones like kinetin and zeatin that don't manage so well out of culture or in heat sterilizing. So you have to, it's specialized handling. And I was like, really, for like the 0.1%, 0.25% difference, I was like, I'm just going to go with the easy stuff. And it's kind of funny. It still stands today.
That's really, really cool.
Oh, man. The world of tissue culture and cannabis is so wild because obviously it was a slow start.
Right.
But it's a thing.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and then every state we're seeing coming online now. Like now you're seeing the priorities change. Where like people are almost looking at this like, okay, well, before we even have this facility in this, our first thing is culture, bringing in very clean genetics. Like it's becoming a staple of so many processes and even smaller cultivations. Like it's only a matter of time before every viable company has to have tissue culture as one of their extensions, and with this kit that you have, it makes it possible for the small scale operators to get into tissue culture and back up these genetics and make sure that they're clean.
Carry on. Elaborate. Tell me more.
You know, it's only a matter of time where we're already getting there, you know.
The only matter of time it is now is when your listeners get their own, set up their own space. Because what's really funny, I mean, part of this is we start out talking about how funny hydro and grow was when it started. And it really was. When I worked at that store in San Jose, when I worked at that store in Gainesville, I would have people who come in and they were absolutely sincere. They'd say, why would you use a light to grow a plant? The sun is free. That's stupid. Or why are you trying to get away from soil? Because soil has everything they need and you're trying so hard with this other stuff. And I was like, you're absolutely right. You know, we're providing more tools because you never know what anybody is going to need at what time. Right. It opens all the doors, you know, but that was then. And obviously we know where stuff has gone since then. And what's really wild is even with the tissue culture, at first I didn't see all of the opportunities. I was just trying to help some of the big operators fix their stuff. But what's really funny is you take all those prior stories, me showing up at someone's place, making stuff work. I haven't gotten into the middle of the night stuff where it's like, okay, we've got what we got, and this shit has to be done before I leave in the morning. Home Depot's not going to be open till 9. I'm already going to be an hour on the road. Right. And so it's like you make what you have work wherever you are, and it was doing the exact same thing with culture, and it worked, and to carry that forward. And so where we stand today is, you know, material, my kit, anybody's kits. Shoot, the Athena kit is you out of the box. You can set this up where you are. I definitely make my greatest effort at usability, user friendliness, easy start, faster results. You know, even when we do tissue culture, I'm trying to stay just soup skin away from having rooted plants, so that anything sort of weird, you go back to what you know. You know, and that's the whole idea anyway. You know, culture is gorgeous, but it's all about big flowering plants, you know, and carrying on the genetics. I've simplified over time, and really narrowed stuff down to really kind of a 4-step shortcut, and the tissue cloning, which is hands down right now my most popular promotion. Anywhere I go, to a big operator, a family operation in the hills, or to even my closet clone savers and so on like that, who just don't have room for mother plants, is they're really kind of starting with exactly the same thing. It's what I put together really so I could get results fast, but turns out to solve just about all the things that anybody was looking for, and that is storage, cleaning the plants, restoring the genetics, eliminating viroids, eliminating mom rooms. You know, you eliminate moms, you get a whole room full of bright lights that are going to now operate with less electricity, right, and turn into cash. Mom rooms don't make money; they're tap. We can do all this stuff in not just a few short shelves, but I've actually changed the program so that growers do all of this from their veg table. So real simply, this is a great opportunity to kind of share with everybody the simplified version of what I'm doing, and that is we are going to growers' veg tables. Hopefully you have 2 or 3 flowering rooms, even the smallest growers. I started doing this when I was a bedroom grower. I learned real quick that we could run half as much heat. You take the electricity and we run alternating 12-hour cycles. One of those relay tools I was making were flip-flops. Right. And that meant that I could clone my veg plants for the next crop without having to wait 8 weeks or 7 weeks for it to be ready when the veg plants would be overgrown, but 4 weeks when everything was perfect. And so that was me then. Today, I am topping our best veg plants. Vegetable ordinarily have about 196 or 100 veg plants. The tallest ones, the most aggressive ones, we're going to go and take those first 35 best tops, and that is 1 inch. It's usually a crappy clone. It's an ideal tissue culture, and you got to take it anyway. So instead of trash or compost, it's gold. We clean that up and we put it into one of my tissue culture test tubes. I'll kind of tell everybody what's in the tubes and what makes them special in a moment. But this is tissue cloning. We're going to make a plant from this in only 3 weeks. It's going to be root ready.
That's crazy.
7 or 10 days later, that same table now has been topped. We're going to top everybody, but we just wanted to make sure the best stuff ended up in tubes.
Right.
Because that's going to be the next generation. All these tops are exploding. Everybody is vigorous. We're going to go around and we're going to do the same kind of topping, but I'm going to get 100 pieces and put those in tubes. So I've got 130, 40 to choose to make my next 100. So we've now got a cycle. Veg has provided the starting material for the following crop. It's going to be in the test tube for about 3 weeks, and then it's going to be in rooting for about 5 weeks. Yeah, that's an 8-week cycle. That wouldn't really work if you were doing the regular clone thing, but most of this is in self-contained vessels on a shelf.
And this is allowing you to clone right when you flip, basically.
Right? As soon as you do that second topping and they start to grow a little bit, entirely up to you. But I always put my emphasis on the pruning the veg plants for flower. That's always the goal. So whatever your number is, usually it's going to be 6 or 8 good limbs, and then we're going to leave like 2 nodes on each one. The top one I'll take back to 1 node, but each one of the limbs that shoots from that's your harvested material. For all the grows I do, there's going to be the growers who choose bigger plants. There's going to be the growers who choose smaller plants, sea of green, whatever. That seems to be the perfect right in between for time, resources, money, and yield, all the way across. And then lastly, you could throw in 6 E's of harvest because all of them are so close to uniform. The candelabra, we're looking at 12 to 16 really good 24 to 30 inch sticks with a big giant head on them, and they're flowered all the way up, kind of stuff. I'll let everybody do their own thing, but the program is basically the same. On the tissue culture side, yeah, we've got a few weeks lag, but what does it really matter? Because you're just pruning the veg crop. The plants that we pruned 4-6 weeks ago are ready to go into plug trays and ready to be your new veg plants. So you always have all the veg plants you could possibly ask for. They're all tissue culture derived. And now, kind of with that base part, is I can kind of share with everybody how those advantages come about. How are we restoring genetics? How are we eliminating viroids? Good time to note, incidentally, is that when I say tissue culture is simply, it's just like the cloning or the hydroponics but we are going to grow the plants in an agar medium that is water, nutrients, vitamins that you all know, rooting hormone typically for my shortcut, and sugar. So that's the special part. That's what makes tissue culture special. It's ordinary white sugar. Wow. Because the plant roots can't absorb sugar, but the stem can. Tissue culture is like the ultimate foliar feed. We will cut the plant down to that 1 inch piece or so. Because we're using sugar, everything needs to be clean. So you've seen the air hoods, you've seen the scalpels and forceps. This is actually really practical stuff because we can clean the plant. We can prepare the stuff so it has no infection anywhere around. The air is clean, and then you just don't want to touch it and reintroduce it. Plus, we keep them isolated, so when you do have a little spoilage, we pull those bad tubes out. The good tubes go on to finish. You've got lots and lots of backup, and it's all self-contained for that many weeks. But that's tissue culture right there, whether it's one plant in a little 1 inch tube, 2 plants, 3 plants. You've seen all the containers. The pieces are all the same. Our choice is going to simply be what hormone do we use, what kind of growth do we want. I'm sticking mostly with the shortcut. We'll elaborate on everything else later or as necessary. But that 1 inch piece goes in, and in 3 weeks, the stem that's in the solution. So agar is like gelatin. It holds it all together. So we can turn these tubes upside down and nothing falls. It still looks like it's suspended up there.
Which makes shipping very easy, right?
It does, but we've got a thing for shipping too, which is really funny. We've kind of bypassed all of that stuff because it will break. It's sort of jelly, which is good. That means we can get it out of the tubes and use them again. But you picture this 1 inch plant, and about half of it is inside this jelly. The sugar is soaking in through the outside. It has a little cut on the bottom. We still do the 45-degree angle. And And at that point, the sugar is being absorbed and turned into wood. So you can see this thing get really fat. What was a little skinny stem.
Callousing?
Callousing will be one of those. That's kind of the pre-rooting. But we'll actually see the stem getting fat from the inside because it's absorbing the sugar. That green cambium layer, it's right under.
So is that like the pith thickening up then?
The pith, yes. The pith is your wood. The plant is making pith. It's turning sugar into wood, stored energy that it will then exploit and take back out when we move it. So that's number one. And number two is that rooting hormone has initiated those roots. We're not really going to see roots in culture. We don't want to see roots in culture. I want to see pre-roots, bumps, callus.
Got it.
All those things will turn into roots. And I want this all to happen really fast. I really want to use tissue culture to make a clone from a plant piece that would be too small to clone by itself.
Got it.
At that point, we take that out. We just give it a little rinse so the sugar is rinsed off so it doesn't leave it vulnerable. The plant from culture itself is a little extra tender. We have new leaves, by the way. So the piece that went in is relatively leaf-free. New leaves have grown inside, but those still lack a cuticle, the protective waxy surface, and the little stomata breathing holes under the leaves have never closed. So we kind of got that to deal with, but it makes acclimation not so much different than the regular cloning we would do in a tray.
Got it.
With a dome, preferably in an environment that itself has higher humidity. Regular cloning is usually 70% humidity on the outside, 90 plus on the inside.
Right.
Same thing. We'll do that. Little more emphasis on mold spray, just in case anything floats in.
What what are you using for a mold spray? Like a Zerotol?
I really like
or
peroxide.
something?
Zerotol is fantastic. Zerotol, which is peracetic acid, fantastic, perfect. Peroxide will usually be about 0.2%. That's like an ounce or two of grocery store in a liter. And that's good. One spray to get started, and then maybe a follow up after that, then as needed. But we'll do a little more emphasis on the acclimation, and this is why I made my shortcut. Ouch! The way I did is because I want to get people to finish plants as a lesson.
Got it.
First, because there are so many other kits and so many other things.
Instead of just getting thrown into the fire, it's more of a entering into the realm.
It's more of like going so deep in the process, right? It's like, oh, let's multiply this plant. Let's go through all this. Standard tissue culture that you're going to read everywhere else kind of has a stage 1 introduction.
Right.
So let's get used to tissue culture altogether. B2 is going to be multiplication. So let's start multiplying it. C will be taking those pieces and beginning to tissue culture root them. And 4 is acclimation out of culture into plugs. And I just jumped straight to number 3.
Got it. Now, it's also very, very interesting about all this is a lot of times I'll get questions from people and they're like, how do I get into the industry? It's
tissue culture
up until
or cultivation,
just
cannabis
cultivation in general.
Yeah.
But in the last year, that has been my direction for everyone. When someone contacts me and they're like, oh, I want to get into this space and I'm so excited. Yeah. I almost think the very best thing people can do is everyone can afford your kit. Mm-hmm. You can go get this kit, and in the place of your own home, you can start learning these fundamentals, and you can be a fucking asset very, very quickly. There's nothing in my mind, in my opinion, I think as far as anyone looking at this space, where you can fast track yourself to being seen, noticed, and needed is by practicing tissue culture and following these
just about
lessons.
Everybody who ever works for me is managing somebody's lab right now.
So what does that say?
It says I'm worried about losing Sarah. Don't give her any ideas. We're just getting to know each other.
But that could be like if I was looking at the space and I wanted to be in it. If I got this kit and with my other job or my other hobbies and I worked on this kit and I could learn to do that and I could go to any facility and be like, I can come in here right now and do tissue culture. Like, you're an asset right out of the gate.
That's really cool that you say that, and then you're absolutely right. It's kind of funny. I just had one of my oldest friends, 25 years or so, call me last night, and he used to own a store. He owned a store in Queens, and had kind of gotten out of the space, but was like, hey, I'm, first of all, I'm a little bored. Second of all, I'm tired of looking at your Instagram posts. And he goes, what would I do to do all this stuff? And he's in New York. And I was like, be my guy in New York. You be your guy in New
Crazy
York.
emerging market.
It's amazing. I know. I could easily hit the road and never come home. But I told him exactly that. I said, look, there's obviously only one of me. And I go, and the message is exactly the same. I'm going to do the same thing in someone's location that I've just told everybody listening about, and is actually in the instructions. And it's online at microclone.com as well, because you can see all these things, in practice. I make no bones about it. Go for it, do it. But that's kind of it. And look at it in terms of, slow, cheap startup.
Right.
Because in only a few weeks, you can do everything we've just talked about. Without much more work, you can get good at it and start to sort of venture out. You can learn a little more about multiplying plants, because some people want to be more nursery.
Right.
Which does, put us in, actual plant production without so many veg plants. Though we really try to do more of a hybrid, just for the reason that cannabis does not multiply at great rates in culture.
Right.
So even when you see the pictures, the conception of node, compound, finest, and so on, they're doing pretty good. They've reached that when you're making more and more of something exponential. They've reached those exponential points where they actually have to root plants, or the place will totally grow out of control.
Right.
4 weeks from now, whatever you see on the shelf is going to be, there's going to be 4 times as many.
Right.
So you're basically rooting for survival. And we'll work towards that. Everybody should have that problem, right? But to just keeping it super simple. And of course, this is where most of everybody's getting a job, is going into an existing facility. Existing facility wants to do this type of work. If I'm there, I am helping set up a small lab, teaching the first few staff how to do everything, following up with them to see sort of how everything goes, let them expand, and then go back and participate when they start reaching the jump up, the upscale. We need, we start most of our stuff on our simple scale is going to be a little home pressure cooker. So, my favorite is like the 22 plus or minus quart Presto or Tefal. Where there might be the smaller one for the smaller batches, same brand, or even now Instant Pots. I try, like an 8 quart is perfect because it's got the timer built in. But we'll do a lot of this stuff in countertop appliance type pressure sterilizers. Again, a little note on how tissue culture works is, we're going to clean the plants, we clean the tools, we clean the air, we clean our hands, but the media is usually sterilized in a pressure cooker. It's the easiest, most reliable way. Now that everybody is kind of more familiar with mushrooms as well, not so different, but easier. All those ingredients we're talking about, the nutrients, the sugar, the agar, are all mixed up, and we'll dispense them into the containers typically, because we can stack those in the cooker, sterilize the vessel and the media at the same time. When it leaves, it's really hot, and we can put it in the cool area, in the clean area to cool, and it's ready to go. It's ready to use this afternoon. It's ready to use this tomorrow, next week. I've got media at my place that's going on, 4 weeks old now or so. We only really worry about it if it, for instance, starts to shrink away from the side of the tube, because it's dehydrating.
Right.
And there's going to be a plant in it, so it'll dehydrate a little more. And even then, we fixed them before, sometimes by just dribbling a little water in them and melting them in the microwave. Lots and lots of home tools. But that's the starter scale. And even with pressure cookers, you might buy 3 of them, so that you're filling one, loading one, one's on the stove, the other one's cooling, and you can rotate those out. And I've got 500 clone a day operations with 2 people, 3 pressure cookers, and they're going to town. But then they'll upscale.
Right.
What do I do when I need a big autoclave? What I need? We start looking at automatic dishwashers. The pictures I was just getting ready to Instagram this morning, or I got a tour behind the last bar I was in, because I really wanted to know how their little bar dishwasher works. I was like, 50 seconds from start to finish, and I was like, this is what we need. So I was like, I'm going to a restaurant supply as soon as I leave this talk show.
That's awesome. And now, Bill, you were doing classes too, if I remember correctly. Are you still doing the classes here in Sonoma County?
I am. Roanoke Park. So we've got our lab at, right next to Monster Gardens on Classic Court in Roanoke Park. We're the door on the left side of the building.
Staple of Sonoma County as far as cultivation stores. Like
Heather and Jim are super and have been for 2 decades. I
mean, what they've done for customers, the industry, they've been there forever. I know Jim personally, really just awesome person. That's where I saw your kits, for the very first time, maybe like eight years ago or something like that.
Okay.
So
he obviously didn't care enough to introduce us.
no, he never did.
I guess you must be the secret weapon, or
Right?
I am.
Maybe he'll start introducing as part of that old school,
Jim's never anything like that. He is so open. He's so sharing, and he's so solid. I mean, really, just the two of them are like two of the very best people in the entire industry.
And so you have your lab next to them in Rotor Park?
It's in their building. Yeah, it's funny.
Okay.
They got just a little 1,000 square foot separate warehouse, so I get my own door. But it is the same building.
Cool.
Anybody who's ever entered on the office side where it says go around the other way, you've got the hallway leading to the store, and on the other little door behind the elm tree that will eventually get a sign. I keep putting up handwritten stuff and they blow away. But no, it's great. And we don't have to have a great big lab. I've got really just in the pallet racking put up white and black plastic so I could close in one bay of pallet racking, put clear vinyl across the front so I could close it in. Inside we have a little Honeywell HEPA filter, about $150 air filter from Target or Home Depot. And I've got positive pressure. So I've got a little 4-inch fresh filter with a 4-inch inline fan blowing into the space. So it's going to pre-filter the air.
Got it.
Make sure, I've got incidental heat in there, the lights. And when in my case, I've got a laminar hood because this is the second part. We've got lighted shelves. We discussed the kitchen. The transfer area needs to be a little clean spot. I only have a laminar hood because I got it for $75 when Siemens was moving their factory. We can do all of the same work in a $12 clear plastic storage tub. And the same thing you were talking about before, that is it in the manual, is exactly what we use. Anybody who's seen me at a trade show, I don't bring the hood, I bring the tub. I don't even bring it. I buy it when I get there. So I buy the tub, and we are able to keep the plants clean from the pre-cleaning and chlorine in the jar when we did the collecting into the tubes and so on by working in a little shallow saucer in a puddle of the same chlorine. I've got some of the things I do, for instance, is I have chosen to use the dichlor. I've chosen to use the powdered chlorine that you would use to shock your pool, or clean beer bottles for reuse, baby bottles. You ever been camping? You've got that little aqua tab. Same kind of stuff. In fact, Zerotol. We've worked in Zerotol if we had to. As long as we work in that puddle it's protected, and then we just move it into the tube quickly, without hesitation. And I do clean work at trade shows, so I will show up at MJ Biz this year, at Barcelona in February, and be working on the table right there, cloning people's plants who come to the show. So one of the things we'll do is I'll invite people to come to the show. So come see me at the show, preferably the day before, because you know how I am about that. And it's like, bring your plants. And we will sit there and go to town. We will do classes at the show. We'll do classes at the lab space in Rotor Park. And I travel too if we've got enough people and we can cover all the expenses.
I mean, I've seen you in all other kind of countries too. I mean, especially with everything open up, I'm sure that your stock is extremely high and you're a very wanted man,
Currently, yeah. Now I'm just not wanted by the police as much, and it was never that bad.
What a nice shift, though.
Oh, totally. I mean, tell me about it. In a couple of years, I went from felon to essential worker. Like everybody, like so many people are watching this. I was downtown San Francisco when they had a legal grow with tissue culture space because it's so small. I could actually build my space. This was before Monster Gardens. In an existing grow. And so it's great. I can help them clean their plants and provide stuff, train my staff, and basically the overhead's covered, because I only need a couple hundred square feet. So why do I need to pay rent, utilities, security and stuff? So it's,
You can provide a service and get a little space with it also.
There you go. And you meet a lot of really good people like that.
So where do we find the kit? Where do we find information about you? How do we find information about your classes, and then also one-on-one if people want to hire you and have you come to their facility?
Gotcha. Microclone everything. So microclone.com will have the appointments, the products, a lot of information about how to use it. Because for me, the website's not really so much for shopping as it is convenience, but I want to answer people's questions and give them a place to be able to buy what they're reading about. So the things that we've talked about are graphic and explained online. I've got all kinds of videos linked to that as well. When it gets to classes, that's all under the heading of appointments. So for like short visits to use your kit, longer visits to set up a class, longer visits for the class to come to you, and just any kind of consulting.
Awesome.
Like that. And it coordinates with my calendar. Unfortunately, the pockets for time are starting to get really narrow.
I bet.
I just flew back from D.C., so we did a really big class in Washington, D.C. at Plant Cell Technology. So they make the preservative, the only one that can be used in tissue culture in the entire world, patented.
Wow.
It's got a place. We were saying, for instance, that people might use tissue culture to remove diseases and so on. The preservatives sort of mask those unless you're cultivating for a really long time.
Got it.
In which case, if your organism doesn't multiply and you outgrow it, it goes away. But for the short-term stuff, I still usually leave it out because I want to find the contaminated organisms and get rid of them like that. And that is all. The classes there were tissue culture, biotech, and that's one you might want to look into because that's going to be our deepest dive. That is 3 days, very intense, about 24 hours of usually one on seven. So me and seven students. We've got all the facilities around us. We've got a team of 3 assistants, so everybody can jump in and help, and everybody's experienced. So we just did this leading up to the DC 420 event, and it went off without a hitch. 7 new awesome people to get to hang out with and talk to.
That's awesome. So we're going to put all your information in the description where we can find the kit, where people can find your classes. If you're local to Sonoma County, you can go into Monster Gardens. I know that they sell your kit.
Yes.
And replacement of hormones and different accessories for that also.
Yes.
Bill, I just want to thank you, for coming on the show. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. Like, you're just such a wealth of information.
Yeah.
You share everything openly, which is rare for our industry. There's not too many people willing to give all of the information out there, and that's something that I pride myself in. So it's really great to have you here as a guest. I'm stoked that I'm fighting the same fight, and you're here in Sonoma County, and I've got an ally now. I've got your contact information, and I would absolutely love to have you come back in the future and go over some even more information. Maybe we can get like a table discussion and bring in some other guests too. It'd be awesome.
Oh, all about it. Anytime. I'm so glad that we got this started today. It's been way too long to get to do this, and it's been absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Bill, for coming. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, man.
Some of them come into your life for a reason. Some of them only in your life for a season. Some of them just searching for a deeper meaning.